wind screamed across the valley of Black Hollow that night, dragging the scent of rain and iron across the plains. Abigail Hurst woke to the sound of thunder rolling down from the mountains, shaking her cabin on its stilts. The rain came in sheets, slapping against the glass, finding every crack in the old timber walls. She pulled her shawl tight and reached for the lantern on her bedside table. The flame flared, trembling in the draft, throwing her shadow across the rifle propped beside the bed. Then came the knocking. 3 hard, desperate blows on the door, and a quick, uneven and wrong. Not the steady rhythm of a neighbor, not the polite rap of a traveler. This was fear knocking. She froze. The knocking came again, louder this time. "Who's there?" Her voice wavered through the storm. No answer. Only the wind howling back. Abigail swung her legs off the bed, bare feet meeting cold floorboards. She crossed the room and took up the rifle. The iron latch rattled against the door, pushed from outside by the wind or by hands she could not see. Her breath fogged in the cold air. She lifted the latch. The door slammed open and a man half fell into her cabin, soaked to the bone, blood dripping from his temple. His hat rolled across the floor, his coat clinging to him like a second skin. He hit the ground with a grunt and clawed his way upright, one hand pressed to his side. The lantern light caught the steel glint of a badge half hidden beneath his coat. Bent, blackened, and old. "Don't," he rasped, spitting blood onto the floorboards. "Don't turn me in, ma'am. Not till sunrise." For a moment, all she heard was the storm. Then his words sank in. "Turn him in." She looked closer. The stranger's face was lean, the kind worn by dust and duty. A scar crossed his cheek, pale against his skin. His eyes were gray, not frightened but exhausted. He sagged against the wall, breathing in short bursts. "Name," she demanded. He managed a crooked smile. Used to be Silas Creed, once a lawman. Now just a name on someone's bounty sheet. Abigail felt her stomach twist. Silas Creed. She'd heard that name in whispers at the general store. A former U.S. Marshal accused of killing his own men and robbing a gold train. Every bounty hunter in 3 counties was said to be looking for him. She kept the rifle pointed steady. "Why my door?" "Because you're the only one whose light was still burning." Outside, thunder cracked again. Through the window, she saw torches moving in the distance. Riders sweeping the valley, shouting to one another over the rain. Abigail's pulse raced. The town already called her cursed. Her husband had died under strange circumstances a year ago. Found at the bottom of the ravine behind the Hurst ranch, a bullet hole in his chest and no witnesses to speak of. Folks said she drove him to it. Others said she knew who did. Either way, the widow of Black Hollow was a story people whispered, not one they visited. And now a bleeding outlaw lay on her floor. Silas coughed, blood flecking his chin. "Please," he said, his voice low and raw. "They think I stole what they did. Give me till sunrise to prove it. After that, I'll walk out and face what's coming." Abigail stared down at him, the rifle heavy in her hands. The torches were getting closer. She could hear the horses now, the clatter of hooves in the mud, the low bark of men's voices. Her choices were few. Hand him over and let Boone's men search her house, or hide him and take on another curse to her name. Lightning lit the room, white and violent. In that flash, she saw the scar on his shoulder, a 5-pointed star seared deep into the skin. Not a criminal brand. A badge mark. Proof once sworn. The rifle trembled in her hands. She looked toward the window. Torches only 100 yards off now. She blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the room. Only the sound of rain and breathing remained. She crouched beside Silas, whispering, "Stay quiet." Hoofbeats stopped just beyond her porch. Someone called her name through the rain. "Abigail, you in there?" It was Sheriff Boone, her late husband's brother. Sheriff Boone filled the doorway like a storm made of flesh. Rain slid off his hat brim, dripping onto the floorboards that Abigail had scrubbed just that morning. Behind him, 2 deputies loomed, their slickers steaming from the downpour. Lantern light glimmered off their gun belts, the smell of wet leather and mud thick in the air. Abigail clutched her shawl tighter and forced her breathing steady. "Evenin', Mrs. Hurst," Boone said, voice low and gravelly. "Storm caught you up too, huh?" She nodded faintly. "Been a hard one." His eyes swept the room, the table, the fire, the single plate of stew half-eaten. Every creak of the wood felt like a confession waiting to spill. One of the deputies knelt near the door, tracing muddy prints with a gloved hand. "You been alone tonight?" Boone asked. Always am, she said. Boone stepped closer, the floor groaning beneath his boots. He bent low, his breath warm with whiskey. Word is a man came this way. Tall fella, gray eyes. Might be bleedin'. You seen him? Abigail shook her head, eyes down. Ain't seen no one but the wind. Boone studied her for a long, dangerous silence. He leaned closer until she could see her reflection in the black of his pupils. If you see a man with a star carved into his shoulder, he said softly, you tell me. He killed my men. You understand? The words hung heavy like lead. He straightened, signaling his men to move on. The deputies stamped out, muttering about tracks lost in the rain. Boone paused at the threshold. You're looking pale, Abby. You sure you're eating right? She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Storm keeps me restless is all. Boone nodded slowly, then tipped his hat. Lock your doors. Don't trust no one you don't have to. When the door shut, Abigail didn't move for nearly a minute. Only when she heard the faint jingle of spurs fade into the storm did she let her breath out. Her knees buckled. She clutched the table edge to steady herself. Then a faint scraping sound came from behind the hearth. Abigail froze. Don't shoot, came a hoarse whisper. A hand, trembling and bloodied, pushed aside the loose stones. Silas Creed crawled out of the shadow, his shirt torn, his face ghost pale in the firelight. He sank against the wall, breathing hard. She dropped to her knees beside him. You near got me killed, she hissed. Didn't mean to, he rasped. I've outrun worse, but not many. The flicker of the fire caught the curve of his shoulder. A faint scar burned into the flesh, shaped like a 5-pointed star. She reached out before thinking, brushing dirt away. It wasn't a brand of guilt. It was a badge seared into memory. They said you killed men wearing that mark, she murmured. His eyes opened, gray and tired. They wear it now. But I carried it first. The room felt smaller, tighter. The past pressed in. Boone's rise from deputy to sheriff. The sudden fire that took her ranch. The way her husband's debts had vanished overnight after his death. Silas watched her face as if reading thoughts she didn't want spoken. You know Boone, he said quietly. Known him all my life, she answered. Family by marriage. He took care of things after my husband passed. Silas gave a bitter smile. Yeah, Boone's good at taking care of things, especially when they get in his way. Abigail met his gaze. What do you know about my husband? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached inside his coat and drew out a folded letter, its paper stained and soft from travel. A red wax seal still clung to the edge, marked with her husband's initials. Abigail stared, breath caught in her chest. Silas placed it in her trembling hands. Found it in a marshal's postbag after the fire, he said. It was addressed to you. She looked at the seal, her fingers shaking. What's in it? She whispered. Silas's eyes met hers, dark and certain. Truth, he said. The kind that gets people killed. The rain softened into a dull patter against the roof, but Abigail couldn't hear it over the pounding in her ears. The letter lay between her trembling fingers, its wax seal cracked under her thumb. The initials J.H. stared back at her like a ghost that refused to rest. Her husband's hand, his name, his betrayal lingering even after death. Silas sat slumped in the corner, shirt torn open, blood drying like rust down his ribs. The firelight flickered over the scar on his shoulder, the faint, proud mark of a man once sworn to law. He watched her with quiet patience, eyes hard but not unkind. Go on, he said softly. You need to read it. Abigail swallowed hard. The seal gave way with a sigh. The paper inside was wrinkled and damp, the ink blurred but legible. Her husband's handwriting looped across the page, firm, nervous, rushed. Abby, if you're reading this, it means Boone found out. I did wrong. I helped him rob that train near Silver Vein. I thought it was law work, but it wasn't. Boone took the gold and pinned it on Silas Creed, said it was justice for the men who crossed him. I kept quiet, but now he's cleaning house. I reckon I'm next. If anything happens to me, Creed's the only one who can make it right. Trust him, even if the whole town says not to. The letter slipped from her hand and drifted to the floor. For a long time there was nothing, just the hiss of the fire and the faint rasp of Silas breathing. He wrote that. After he died? She whispered. Silas's voice was low, rough. 2 days after they said he went missing. I found it sealed in a marshal's pouch they never meant anyone to see. Abigail's throat burned. He helped Boone steal that gold? Silas nodded slowly. Boone built his empire on lies. He's got half the law in this territory wearing his badge, but none of them remember who earned it first. He gestured toward the scar on his shoulder. That mark was the last honest thing left. Abigail rose, pacing, the letter clutched in her hand. Boone told me you shot my husband. Silas looked up, eyes glinting in the dim light. I was there, but I didn't pull the trigger. He was already dead when I found him. He'd tried to warn me, same as he's warning you now. The wind outside picked up again, rattling the shutters. Abigail pressed her palm to the window pane and saw torchlight flickering faintly through the trees. Riders circling the valley, searching. They won't stop till they find you, she said quietly. I know. And if they do, they'll hang you before the sun's up. Maybe. Silas tried to stand, grunting through the pain. But I didn't come here to die. There's a ledger hidden near Silver Vein Station. It's got Boone's signature on every gold shipment he stole. Names, dates, everything. That's my proof. She turned to him. Disbelief and fear tangled in her eyes. You expect me to believe there's some book out there that'll bring Boone down? Silas smiled faintly. You don't have to believe it. You just have to let me live long enough to fetch it. The words hung in the room like smoke. Abigail stared at the dying fire, her husband's letter curling in the heat. Her world, her name, her marriage, her faith had been built on a lie. She reached for her shawl, her voice trembling. If Boone's the devil you say he is, then you're not safe here. I ain't ever been safe, Silas said, pushing himself up. But if I can put that ledger in your hands, maybe you will be. The rain outside eased to a whisper. But through the thin glass, a sharper glow cut through the mist, another torch, closer now. Moving slow, Abigail crossed to the door and peered through the crack. Boone's men were still in the valley, her breath caught. They never left. Silas's jaw tightened. Then we'd best be ghosts before dawn. Outside, a horse whinnied. Boots splashed in the mud. The sound of a voice drifted through the night. Boone's deputy calling her name. Abigail turned, eyes wide. They're here. Silas grabbed his revolver, half empty but steady in his hand. Then this storm ain't done with us yet. The fire snapped, throwing sparks across the floor as the glow of the torches drew closer to the cabin walls. Dawn came gray and restless over Black Hollow, the kind of light that felt too thin to warm anything. The storm had passed, leaving the ground slick and heavy with mud. Abigail crouched by the cellar door, her hands trembling as she eased it shut. Below her, Silas Creed waited in the dark, breathing slow, every sound above him a reminder that one wrong step could end them both. Stay quiet, she whispered. They'll be here any minute. From the ridge, the echo of hoofbeats rolled down the hill. Boone's men were sweeping the valley again. 5 riders fanning out through the mist, their coats still dripping from the storm. Abigail wiped her palms on her skirt and tried to calm her pulse. The rifle lay hidden by the window, a single shell chambered. She prayed she wouldn't need it. The first rider dismounted, Deputy Carter, barely 20, a boy with a badge too big for his chest. He called out, Mrs. Hurst? Sheriff says we should check your barn. Abigail forced her face into something resembling calm and stepped out onto the porch. You'll find nothing but rainwater and rot in there, Carter. Stormnear took the roof. He hesitated, glancing toward the barn, then back at her. You been out this morning? Tracks lead this way. She looked down and saw them, boot prints in the mud, deep, heavy, and unmistakable. Her heart seized. She knelt quickly, scooping mud over them with her bare hands. Been fetching wood, she said. Guess I don't walk as light as I used to. The deputy frowned, unsure. From the cellar came a faint creak, just the timbers settling, but it felt louder than thunder. Abigail's throat went dry. She coughed, covering the noise. Wind gets under the boards this time of year, she said quickly. Sounds like the whole place breathes. Another rider called from the ridge. Find anything? Carter shook his head. Nothing but mud and ghosts. Abigail forced a laugh. You'll find plenty of both out here. The men rode on, but Carter lingered. His gaze slid toward the barn again. You sure you're doing all right, ma'am? Sheriff says it's dangerous for a woman to live out here alone. I've lived with worse than danger, she said, her voice steady now. You tell the sheriff that. He nodded uncertainly and followed the others down the trail. The sound of hooves faded into the mist. Abigail stood perfectly still until the last echo died. Then she turned, walked back inside, and lifted the cellar latch. The darkness below stirred. They gone? Silas's voice floated up. For now, she said. He climbed out pale in the morning light, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the cold. You didn't have to do that, he murmured. Risk yourself. She wiped her muddy hands on her apron. Maybe I'm tired of being afraid. He looked at her, something like respect flickering across his face. That's a dangerous kind of tired. Then I reckon I'll fit right in with you, she said. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, gone as quick as it came. Boone won't quit. He knows I'm still breathing. If he finds that ledger before I do, the truth dies with it. Abigail turned toward the window. The fog was lifting, revealing the faint outline of horse tracks winding toward the hills. The men had passed, but they'd be back. She knew Boone. He never left a thing unfinished. A crow cawed from the fence post, breaking the silence. Abigail brushed a lock of hair from her face, her mind already turning. You said the ledger's near Silver Vein Station? Silas nodded, wincing as he pressed a hand to his ribs. Old mail stop. Burned down years back. Boone used it to move the gold. Ledger's hidden in the ashes. Abigail grabbed her coat. Then we'd better move before he thinks to check there. When she turned, Silas was gone. The cellar stood open, empty, his bloodied coat folded neatly by the wall. Silas, she called, stepping outside. The yard was silent except for the whisper of wind through wet grass. Then she saw it, the empty hitching post, the hoofprints cutting fresh through the mud. He'd taken his horse and ridden off alone. She stood there for a moment, the weight of the letter heavy in her pocket. Damn fool, she muttered, pulling her shawl tight. From somewhere down the valley came a gunshot, sharp and distant. She flinched, heart racing. Whether it was warning or death, she couldn't tell, but she knew one thing. The storm wasn't done with her yet. The valley still smelled of rain and smoke when Abigail saddled her mare. The world was hushed, washed clean but heavy with dread. Mist drifted low across the fields as if the land itself were holding its breath. She tucked her husband's letter into her coat pocket, the paper soft from her trembling fingers, and rode out toward the canyons where the Silver Vein Station lay in ruins. The sky was bruised gray by the time she reached the old trail road. Rocks jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and the wind carried the faint creak of a loose sign swinging on its last hinge. She followed tracks pressed deep in the mud, one horse moving fast. Silas Creed's trail. The man was bleeding and hunted, but still he rode with purpose. When she found him, he was kneeling among the ashes of what used to be the station, sifting through charred wood with blackened fingers. His coat hung open, soaked with blood, his breath coming rough. You're supposed to be hiding, she said, sliding off her horse. He didn't look up. Hiding never got anyone cleared of a murder they didn't commit. She crouched beside him, brushing aside soot. Beneath the burned floorboards lay a half-melted tin box, rusted but intact. Silas pried it open with his knife. Inside, wrapped in scorched oilcloth, was a ledger, old, singed around the edges but legible. The inked pages shimmered faintly in the morning light. Silas turned it so she could see. Names, dates, shipments. Boone's signature scrawled beside every gold transfer. Bribes paid. Witnesses buried. A fortune in blood. Abigail felt her breath catch. He wrote everything down. Pride's the last sin to die, Silas said. He thought no one would ever see this again. Before she could answer, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Then came the echo of hooves. Silas stiffened. They found us. Abigail's eyes darted to the ridge. A line of riders emerged through the fog. Boone's posse, rifles raised, torches flaring in the gloom. 5 men closing fast. Silas grabbed the ledger and shoved it into his saddlebag. There's a coal chute under the station. Leads to the dry wash behind the ridge. Abigail hesitated. You're hurt. You won't make that climb. I'll make it long enough to buy you time, he said, drawing his revolver. She grabbed his arm. You're not dying out here for me. Wasn't planning to. But if I fall, you take that ledger and run till dawn. Promise me. She shook her head, jaw tight. You die and the truth dies with you. Gunfire cracked, splinters of wood sprang from the ruined walls. They ducked behind the collapsed beams as bullets hissed through the air. Boone, Silas shouted, voice echoing through the canyon. You'll hang for every man you killed. A voice answered, cold and triumphant. You first, Marshal. The next volley tore through the roof. Silas fired back, his shots precise, deliberate. One rider fell from his horse. Abigail reloaded his spare revolver and handed it to him, her hand steady now despite the chaos. You shoot like a lawman, she said. He managed a faint grin. You hide like one. Smoke filled the air as one of the torches landed in the wreckage. Flames caught the dry timber licking across the ruins. The heat pressed close, turning every breath to fire. Silas coughed. "We move now." They crawled toward the coal chute, the roar of the blaze rising behind them. Abigail dropped first, sliding down the narrow shaft, scraping her hands raw against the stone. Silas followed, dragging the saddlebag with him. They tumbled out into the dry wash below, coughing, faces streaked with ash. Above them, the station exploded, a thunderclap of wood, fire, and gold dust bursting into the air. The force knocked them flat. For a moment, it felt like the sky itself was burning. When the smoke cleared, they looked back. Boone's men were silhouettes against the flames circling the wreckage. Silas groaned, clutching his side. "He'll think we're dead." Abigail helped him to his feet. "Then let's make him wish we were." He met her eyes, something fierce and alive flickering behind the pain. "You've got grit, Mrs. Hurst." "I buried fear with my husband," she said, tightening her grip on the saddlebag. "All that's left is truth." Far above them, Boone reined his horse beside the smoking ruins. He stared down into the ash and spotted something half-buried. Silas Creed's bent badge glinting in the firelight. Boone picked it up slowly, turning it in his fingers. "So," he muttered, smiling thinly. "Still breathing, are you?" He slipped the badge into his coat and spat into the dirt. "Then I'll bury you myself before sunrise." They slid into the hollow of Widow's Creek like shadows seeking shelter. The creek was a pale ribbon of water strangled by reeds and slick stones, a place old folks in town used to warn children about, where promises went to drown. Silas leaned his weight against a mossy boulder and let out a breath that sounded like a confession. Abigail knelt beside him, rough hands probing the wound at his side, stripping away cloth, pressing fingers where bone tried to speak through flesh. "You should have stayed," she said, voice small against the rush of water. The ledger dug a dull weight beneath her coat, a promise folded into oilcloth and soot. "I owed you the truth," Silas said. "And him." He spat into the creek. "Boone made me a ghost to keep himself breathing easy." They scavenged a hollow under a cross-marked rock, a pile of stones the creek had tossed together years before. And Silas, eyes pinched, slid the ledger beneath the stones where the water could hardly reach. His hands shook not only from pain but from the need to make the evidence impossible to lose. "There," he whispered. "Nobody looking for gold reads a dry ledger under a creek bed." She covered the spot with a flat stone, set another cross on top with her boot to mark it. It felt like burying a child. It felt like burying a piece of her marriage she'd never been allowed to mourn. They camped low among the reeds, the moon a thin coin behind clouds. Silas talked then when Abigail's fingers had stopped trembling. He told of years past, of a marshal's badge earned in a canyon ambush, of promises to men who trusted him, of Boone's slow cleverness turning law into ledger. He spoke of how Boone had bought a silence with gold and burned the rest. "You think the town will listen?" she asked. Her voice was flat, the hope brittle as old glass. "If you show them that book," he said, "they got no story left to tell but the truth." He tapped the spot where the ledger lay. "But I can't run forever." A wet sound snapped their heads up. Footsteps on whetstone, careful and slow. Torches bobbed farther down the creek, moving like hungry moths. Men's voices, low and sure. "Spread out," someone whispered. A boot heel scuffed the gravel, close enough to hear the scrape of leather. Abigail felt the world accordion tight. Silas slid a pistol from his belt, fingers white around the grip. Abigail's hand found a stone, heavy and cold. She breathed in, tasting iron and river mud. "Boone?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. A laugh, thin and practiced, drifted between the reeds. "Close enough, Widow." Silas took one step forward, then another, and uncurled his jaw to speak. Boone's shadow came over the water, enormous in the torchlight, mounted high and sure. His grin was a blade. "You've been hiding my little secret," Boone called. "Thought you could whisper truth into a stranger's ear and it'd change no minds." Silas squared his shoulders, the creek behind him and the ledger under his boots. Abigail raised her stone. The world held its breath. Boone dismounted, boots sinking into the mud, and the rifle at his shoulder looked like an accusation. He stepped closer, eyes hard as flint. "Now hand it over," he said, "or I take everything you love and call it justice." Silas tightened his grip. Abigail heard the creek, the reeds, the men closing in. She made her choice with a look that cut straight through Boone's claim to law. The rifle clicked as someone else's weapon came up behind Boone. Boone stepped into the moonlight, the silver edge of his rifle glinting against the dark. The creek ran shallow between them, whispering over stones as if the land itself feared to speak too loud. Silas stood facing him, weak but steady, the mud sucking at his boots. Abigail was at his side, her shawl torn, her face streaked with soot and courage. Boone's men spread out in a crescent behind him, their torches throwing wild shadows across the ravine. Boone smiled like a preacher at the pulpit. "Ain't this something? The fallen marshal and the cursed widow. You two make a fine picture of sin." Abigail's hands curled into fists. "You've got no right to talk about sin, Boone. Not after what you done." He tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Done? I'm the law in this county. Everything I do's legal by definition." He leveled the rifle at Silas. "You, on the other hand, you're a dead man carrying stolen paper and lies." Silas took a step forward, unflinching though his side bled through the bandage. "You can paint law in gold all you like, Boone. It still smells like rot underneath." Boone's grin sharpened. "You always did have a way with words, Creed. Too bad your badge didn't keep you honest." Lightning flickered beyond the ridgeline, low thunder rumbling behind it. The storm that had passed was turning back, crawling along the horizon. Abigail felt the air tighten, the kind that came before judgment. "You killed my husband," she said quietly. Boone didn't blink. "Your husband died a coward. He thought writing a confession would wash his sins away. Didn't even see me raise the gun." Silas's hand twitched toward his revolver, but Abigail caught his arm. Her eyes stayed fixed on Boone. "Why?" "Because he got soft," Boone said, stepping closer. "Because he wanted to tell you everything. Because you were the one weakness he had left." The words hit her harder than a bullet. Her throat closed around them, her world breaking a second time. Boone's voice grew almost gentle. "Now hand over that ledger, Abby, and I'll tell folks you didn't know a thing. You'll keep your name, your home. The town will forget." Silas's jaw clenched. "You burn the truth, you burn her too." Boone aimed the rifle straight at Silas's chest. "Last chance, Marshal. Choose your grave." The wind rose, whistling through the reeds. Abigail's hands shook, not from fear but from the fury building in her chest. She looked at the man who'd ruined her life, then at the man willing to die for her husband's ghost. In that heartbeat, something shifted inside her. She stepped between them. Boone sneered. "Abigail, move." She didn't. Her voice came calm and even. "You burned my home, Boone. You killed my husband. You stole from every man who ever trusted you, but you won't burn my soul." Boone's eyes flickered with something, fear perhaps or disbelief. The thunder cracked again, loud as cannon fire. Then, almost too fast to see, he pulled the trigger. A flash. A roar, Abigail screamed as Silas jerked sideways, the bullet grazing his shoulder and spinning him to the mud. He dropped to one knee but didn't fall. Boone chambered another round, laughing. "You should have stayed quiet, Marshal. The dead can't talk." Before he could fire again, Abigail swung up the revolver Silas had dropped earlier. Her hands were steady now, her eyes clear. Boone turned too late. The shot echoed across the valley. Boone staggered back, shock on his face, his rifle tumbling into the creek. He dropped to his knees, clutching his side. The wound wasn't deep, but it was enough to make him falter. He glared up at her, breath ragged. You think they'll believe you?" Abigail stepped closer, the barrel of the gun unwavering. "They'll believe the truth when they see it." Boone's smile twisted into something cruel. "Then you better pray your marshal wakes up to tell it." He lunged, grabbing a fistful of mud and flinging it into her eyes. She cried out, stumbling back. Boone snatched his pistol from the creek and fired blindly. The bullet hissed past her head. Silas surged up from the mud, slamming into Boone. The two men crashed into the water, struggling, the current churning around them. Thunder roared overhead as the storm broke open again. They rolled through the shallows, each trying to wrest the gun from the other's grip. Boone's strength came from rage, Silas's from something deeper, a need to make peace with the ghosts he carried. A single shot cracked through the rain. Boone froze, eyes wide. The pistol dropped from his hand, sinking into the creek. He fell backward, the water already dark around him. Silas collapsed beside him, blood washing away into the current. Abigail crawled to him, cradling his head. "Silas," she whispered, "stay with me." He blinked, breath shallow. "Don't." Let him bury the truth again. Lightning flashed one more time, carving the world into white and shadow. Boone's men shouted in the distance, running toward the creek. Abigail pressed her hand over Silas's wound, her heart hammering. "You're not dying on me," she said, though fear clawed at every word. He managed a faint smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." But when she looked down again, his eyes had closed. Behind her, Boone's men were closing in, their torches blazing through the storm. Boone lay half submerged, still breathing, barely. The battle wasn't done. Not yet. Rain fell hard and fast, drumming against the creek stones as if the heavens themselves wanted to drown the valley clean. Abigail knelt beside Silas, her fingers pressed against his wound, her breath coming sharp and desperate. Boone's men shouted somewhere beyond the reeds, their torches weaving through the dark like serpents hunting heat. She tore at the sleeve of her dress, tying it around Silas's shoulder to stop the bleeding. "You hear me?" she said, voice breaking. "You ain't dying, not like this." Silas stirred, eyes opening to thin slits. "Where's Boone?" She looked toward the creek. The sheriff was crawling from the water, mud-caked and trembling, clutching his side. His badge glimmered faintly under the torchlight, cracked and bent. Boone looked like something clawed out of hell, eyes wide, jaw tight with hate. "You should have shot to kill," he rasped. "You don't have it in you." Abigail rose slowly, the revolver heavy in her hand. The rain made her hair stick to her face, but her eyes didn't waver. "You've done enough killing for all of us." Boone laughed through his pain, the sound hollow and bitter. "You think they'll believe a widow and a dying outlaw? I'm the law here, Abby. Always been." He limped forward, hand reaching into his coat. "Give me that ledger and maybe I let you live." Behind her, Silas coughed and dragged himself upright. "You talk too much, Boone." Boone froze. The rain slid down his face as he turned. Silas was on his knees, barely standing, but his hand was steady as it reached into his coat. He pulled something free, a small battered badge, tarnished but still catching the light. "This badge," Silas said, his voice cutting through the storm, "was mine before you ever knew what justice meant. You can steal gold, burn homes, forge papers, but you can't steal what's right." For a second, even Boone's men hesitated. They looked from the broken sheriff to the bleeding man holding that badge like a holy relic. Boone sneered. "That badge died with your title. Then it dies clearing my name," Silas said. He handed the ledger to Abigail. "Show them." Abigail held it high, her voice trembling but strong. "Every shipment, every bribe, every name. Boone's signatures on every page. My husband wrote the truth before you silenced him. You killed him because he wouldn't lie no more." One of Boone's deputies, Carter, the young one from before, stepped closer, face pale. "Sheriff, that true?" Boone's jaw tightened. "Don't listen to her. She's hysterical." Carter shook his head. "I saw your mark on the ledgers at the station last month. You said they were just records." "Shut your mouth, boy," Boone snapped, leveling his pistol at him. That was his mistake. Abigail moved first. The shot cracked through the storm, echoing across the canyon. Boone staggered, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. His gun fell from his grasp as he stumbled backward into the shallows. He tried to speak, but no sound came. His knees gave out, and he fell face first into the creek that had once carried his lies. The water washed the blood away, carrying it downstream like an offering. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rain. Boone's men stood frozen. Then Carter stepped forward and kicked the sheriff's pistol aside. "Guess we need a new lawman," he muttered. Abigail let the revolver drop from her hand. The weight of it left her trembling. She looked at Silas, who still clutched his side, his breath thin. "You did it," she whispered. He gave a tired smile. "No, ma'am. You did." Carter knelt by Boone's body and picked up the ruined badge. "Guess this belongs to you, Marshal." He offered it to Silas, who took it with a shaking hand. "Never thought I'd see it again," Silas murmured. Carter turned to the others. "We take the widow and the marshal back to town. Folks deserve to know the truth." Abigail knelt beside Silas as the men started gathering around. "Can you ride?" "I'll manage," he said, forcing himself upright. He looked down at Boone's body one last time. He thought justice was a thing you could own. Turns out it's just a thing that waits for you. Abigail met his eyes. And it finally found him. They stood together as the rain eased into a steady drizzle. The torches burned lower, flickering against the rising dawn. Somewhere behind the ridge, the first light touched the wet grass, painting everything in gray gold. Abigail turned toward the horizon, her husband's letter safe in her pocket. The ledger clutched to her chest. Boone was gone. The truth was free, but the story wasn't over. Not yet. The dawn bled slowly over Black Hollow, spilling gold across the valley that had known too much darkness. The storm had passed, leaving the earth drenched and glistening. Smoke from Boone's fallen torch curled over the creek like the last breath of a ghost. Abigail and Silas rode side by side through the mist, the ledger secured in her satchel, Boone's badge heavy in Silas's pocket. Neither spoke for miles. The silence between them was its own kind of prayer. When they crested the final ridge, the town came into view, a scattering of buildings huddled beneath the wide, washed sky. The church bell rang once, slow and uncertain, as if the town itself sensed change coming. They rode straight to the sheriff's office. Carter met them at the steps, his face pale but resolute. "Town's waiting," he said. "They've heard talk already. Boone's men are turning their coats faster than the wind." Inside, the small crowd pressed close. Merchants, ranchers, widows, and farmhands, faces familiar but wary. Some stared at Silas with the distrust the law had taught them. Others watched Abigail with quiet pity. She felt their eyes like needles, but she held her head high. Silas leaned on the desk, his breath still ragged. He pulled the ledger from her hands and placed it in front of the mayor, an old man with a face carved by compromise. Every page in there tells the story Boone buried. Names, deals, murders dressed as justice. The mayor hesitated. "That's a mighty claim, Creed." Abigail stepped forward, her voice steady. "It's not a claim. It's confession written in Boone's own hand. My husband helped him, and he paid for it with his life. Boone made me a ghost in my own home. That ledger is the truth we both died for." The mayor's hands trembled as he opened the ledger. The crowd leaned in. The ink had run in places, but Boone's scrawl was unmistakable. Shipments, dates, bribes to judges. The sale of confiscated gold under false warrants. The room went dead quiet, then Carter spoke. "Boone used the badge to rob us blind. Sheriff or not, he was a thief." A murmur rippled through the crowd, disbelief turning to anger, anger to shame. One of the older ranchers spat on the floor. "And we let him do it." The mayor closed the ledger and looked at Silas. "Seems we owe you an apology, Marshal." Silas nodded faintly. "Don't owe me a thing. Just remember the law's only as clean as the hands that hold it." Abigail watched the townsfolk shift, their faces caught somewhere between guilt and relief. They'd built their safety on a lie, and now it crumbled before them. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, striking Boone's badge on the desk. Silas reached out and set it down gently beside the ledger. "That badge used to mean something," he said. "Maybe it still can." The mayor cleared his throat. "And the widow?" he asked quietly. "Her name?" Abigail met his gaze. "My name stays mine. Boone didn't take that." There was silence, then Carter nodded. "Then that's settled. She's cleared. And the marshal's record, too. Let it be known. The truth stands." The bell tolled again, this time louder, echoing across the valley. The crowd drifted out in hushed waves, leaving Abigail and Silas alone. The town outside buzzed with uneasy rebirth, the kind that comes after years of silence. Silas turned to her. "You can rebuild now. You've earned peace." Abigail looked out through the window at the light spilling over the dirt road, at the people who'd once turned away from her. "Peace," she said softly. "A strange word for folks who ain't known it in years." He smiled wearily. "Freedom's not much without it." She turned to him. "And you? You'll stay?" For a moment, something unspoken moved between them. Gratitude, exhaustion, something deeper neither dared name. Silas looked down at his hands, then out toward the horizon. "My road runs long, Abby, always has. But if I ride out of here, it won't be because I'm chased." He stepped closer, his voice dropping low. "You don't owe me a thing. But if I undress this life, strip away the lies, the law, the dust, when what's left is truth, will you stay with that?" Her breath caught. His words weren't about lust. They were about being seen and bare, honest, unguarded. She smiled, small and quiet. "I reckon I've stayed my whole life. Maybe now I'll start living." Outside, the sun climbed higher. Boone's shadow was gone, and in its place, a valley finally beginning to breathe. Weeks passed, and the valley changed its tune. The air over Black Hollow smelled of hay and rain instead of blood and smoke. The gold shipment stopped. The ledgers were sealed and stored, and folks spoke Boone's name only when they needed to remember what power did to weak men. The badge that once ruled through fear now hung above the town hall door, bent, tarnished, and still carrying a lesson. Abigail Hearst's name was cleared before the town council 2 Sundays after Boone's fall. The mayor read her husband's confession aloud for all to hear, his voice cracking somewhere between shame and reverence. When he finished, he said, "The widow of Black Hollow stands unshackled." The townspeople clapped softly at first, then louder, as if trying to drown out their own guilt. Abigail just nodded, her eyes wet but steady. Her ranch, the old Hearst place, was a skeleton of what it once was: burnt beams, blackened earth, fences half-eaten by wind. But she worked it anyway. Each morning she carried buckets from the creek, mended what could still stand, and planted new seed in the charred soil. The ground had memory. It needed to be reminded of good hands. Silas stayed in town for a while, his wound healing slower than his silence. Folks didn't quite know what to do with him. Some called him Marshal again. Others just called him the man who brought the truth. He didn't argue either way. He fixed the jail door, cleaned out the rusted cells, and taught Carter how to keep the books honest. Sometimes at night he'd sit on the porch outside the office, watching the sun fade into the canyons, badge glinting faintly on the table beside him. One evening, as the light softened into that honey-colored hush the valley kept for only a few minutes each day, he saddled his horse and rode out toward the Hearst ranch. Abigail was out back, hammering a new hinge onto the barn door. She looked up at the sound of his horse, wiping her hands on her apron. "Didn't figure you for a man who makes farewells," she said. He dismounted slowly, his limp faint but lasting. "I was hoping this one'd sound more like a beginning." She smiled faintly. "You ridin' far?" "West," he said, "where a man can still find quiet that ain't paid for." He paused, looking out over her land, the way the wind moved through the dry grass like fingers through memory. "Freedom's no use without peace. Thought maybe I'd try for both." Abigail leaned against the barn, her hair caught in the golden light. "Peace don't ride alone, Silas." He met her eyes. For a long while neither spoke. The world seemed to wait. Then he tipped his hat, the way lawmen used to when they left something good behind. "I'll see you again." "Abigail Hearst," he said. "You already have," she replied softly. He smiled, small, almost boyish, then turned his horse toward the horizon. The sun caught him in silhouette, cutting a figure half ghost, half legend as he rode into the distance. The sound of hoofbeats faded slow, like a heartbeat easing after long fear. Abigail watched until the light swallowed him, then turned back toward her fields. The fence still needed mending, the earth still needed tending. But when she looked up at the sky, it didn't feel like the same sky she'd lived under before. It was wider now, kinder. She whispered to the wind, half to him, half to herself. "I stayed." The breeze lifted the words, carrying them out across the valley, over the creek where truth was buried and found again, over the town that had finally opened its eyes. The widow of Black Hollow was no longer a ghost. She was a woman who had faced the fire and come out breathing. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a tired marshal rode west beneath a sky that no longer judged him, only watched, and forgave. Justice hadn't come with vengeance, but with truth laid bare, like skin, like soul, washed clean by rain and time.